Victoria had always considered herself observant. Running a multi-million-dollar real estate company required attention to detail. She noticed everything: the slight hesitation in a client's voice before signing a contract, the way competitors avoided eye contact during auctions, even the small changes in her employees' moods that signaled problems before they erupted. Yet somehow, for 3 whole years, she had completely missed something extraordinary about the man who drove her to work every single day. Robert had been her driver since 2020. He came with excellent references, a clean driving record and a quiet demeanor that Victoria appreciated. She didn't want chatty drivers who tried to make small talk or share their life stories. She wanted someone reliable who understood that her car was an extension of her office, a place where she made phone calls, reviewed documents, and prepared for meetings. Robert was perfect for the role. He arrived exactly 5 minutes early every morning. He kept the car immaculate. He knew all her preferred routes and seemed to have a sixth sense about traffic patterns. When she needed silence, he gave her silence. When she needed to make a call, he somehow made the car even quieter. In 3 years, their conversations had been minimal. "Good morning. Traffic looks clear today. Have a good evening, ma'am." That was about it. Victoria knew almost nothing about him personally. She knew he was somewhere in his late 50s, always wore pressed shirts even though she'd told him casual attire was fine, and he had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, which wasn't often. That was the extent of her knowledge, and she'd been completely fine with that arrangement. Until one rainy Tuesday in March. Victoria's last meeting had been canceled, so she'd left the office an hour early. Normally, she would have texted Robert to let him know, but her phone had died during her final conference call. No problem. Robert was always waiting in the parking garage anyway, probably reading a newspaper or listening to the radio. She took the elevator down to the basement level where her reserved spot was located. The garage was mostly empty at this time. Her heels clicked against the concrete as she walked toward her black Mercedes. That's when she heard it. A voice speaking in what was unmistakably French. Perfect fluid French with the kind of accent that suggested either a native speaker or someone who'd spent years in Paris. Victoria slowed her pace. The voice was coming from near her car. As she got closer, she could see Robert standing by the driver's door, his phone pressed to his ear, speaking animatedly. "Oui, je comprends parfaitement. Ce n'est pas un problème du tout. Je peux vous aider avec ça demain matin." Victoria stopped about 20 feet away, partially hidden by a concrete pillar. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop, or at least that's what she told herself. She was just surprised. Robert spoke French? She waited until he finished his call before approaching. He turned and saw her, and for just a split second something flickered across his face. Surprise? Worry? But it disappeared so quickly she might have imagined it. "Mrs. Ashford, I apologize. I didn't expect you so early." He quickly opened the back door for her. "No problem at all. I should have called." She settled into the back seat, her mind turning over what she'd just heard. "I didn't know you spoke French, Robert." He glanced at her in the rearview mirror as he started the engine. "Oh, yes. Just a bit. I had a friend who needed help with something. Your French sounded excellent from what I heard." "Thank you, ma'am." He pulled out of the parking spot smoothly, effectively ending the conversation. Victoria let it drop. But something had shifted. For the first time in 3 years, she was curious about her driver. The next morning, Wednesday, she paid more attention. When they pulled into the parking garage at her office building, a parking attendant approached to ask about monthly rates. Robert rolled down his window and answered him in flawless Spanish. Victoria blinked. French and Spanish. Interesting. She found herself watching him more closely as the week went on. Thursday morning, they stopped at a red light in Chinatown. An elderly woman was struggling with heavy grocery bags at the corner. Robert rolled down his window and called out to her in what Victoria was pretty sure was Mandarin Chinese. The woman's face lit up and they had a brief conversation before the light changed. Robert waved goodbye and the woman was smiling. "That was kind of you," Victoria said. "She just needed directions to the bus stop," Robert replied simply. Friday afternoon, they were stuck in traffic near the financial district when a lost tourist knocked on the window asking for directions. The man spoke German. Without missing a beat, Robert responded in German, giving detailed directions with hand gestures to help clarify. Victoria sat in the back seat, completely stunned. That was 4 languages, 4 completely different languages spoken with what seemed like native fluency. Who was this man? Over the weekend, she couldn't stop thinking about it. She'd barely noticed Robert for 3 years, and now suddenly she was replaying every interaction, looking for clues she'd missed. Monday morning, she decided to test something. When Robert picked her up, she casually mentioned she needed to stop by an international market in a predominantly Russian neighborhood to pick up some special caviar for a client dinner. At the market, the owner greeted them in heavily accented English. Robert responded in Russian. Actual Russian. Victoria watched them have an animated conversation about different types of caviar, the owner laughing and gesturing enthusiastically. 5 languages. Tuesday. They had a flat tire near a Middle Eastern restaurant. The owner came out to offer help and spoke to Robert in Arabic. Robert answered back fluidly, and soon they were chatting like old friends while changing the tire. 6 languages. Victoria started arriving at the parking garage early. She'd stand by the elevator, just out of sight, listening. Wednesday morning, she heard him speaking Portuguese with a delivery driver. Thursday, he helped a Japanese family with directions in perfect Japanese, 8 languages. She'd counted 8 different languages in less than 2 weeks. She felt like she'd discovered a secret room in a house she'd lived in for years. How had she not noticed this? More importantly, why was a man who spoke 8 languages fluently working as her driver? That Friday evening, as they sat in traffic, she heard him take a call. He spoke in what she didn't recognize at first, but later Googled and figured out was Italian, based on the phrases she'd caught. 9 languages. Her driver spoke at least 9 different languages. Victoria's curiosity had turned into something else now. Suspicion. Was Robert hiding something? Was this some kind of elaborate cover? She'd read spy novels. She'd watched enough thrillers to know that highly intelligent people with mysterious skills sometimes had hidden agendas. She ran a powerful company worth millions. She had access to sensitive information, influential contacts, and private knowledge about major real estate deals before they became public. What if Robert wasn't just a driver? What if someone had planted him there? The thoughts kept her awake at night. She started noticing other things too. Robert was always reading during his downtime, thick books, often in foreign languages. He had multiple smartphones. He seemed to know people everywhere they went. Her mind spun with possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. By the end of the 2nd week, she'd made a decision. She needed answers. She needed to know who Robert really was and why someone with his obvious intelligence and skills was working as a driver. She would confront him directly. No more guessing, no more speculation. Monday morning, she would call him into her home office and demand the truth. Whatever secret Robert was hiding, she was determined to expose it. Her instincts had built her empire, and right now those instincts were screaming that something didn't add up. She just hoped she was wrong about the spy theory, but she had to know for sure. The weekend passed slowly. Victoria rehearsed the conversation in her head dozens of times. By Sunday night, she'd convinced herself she was doing the right thing. Monday would bring answers. One way or another, she would discover the truth about her mysterious driver. Monday morning arrived with gray skies that matched Victoria's mood. She'd barely slept, running through various scenarios in her mind. What if Robert was actually some kind of corporate spy? What if he'd been gathering information about her company's deals for years? What if everything, the quiet demeanor, the perfect driving record, the helpful attitude, was all an act? She texted him at 7 in the morning. "Robert, please come to my home office at 9 a.m. We need to talk." She stared at her phone, waiting for his response. It came within 2 minutes. "Of course, Mrs. Ashford. Is everything all right?" She didn't respond. Let him wonder. Let him sweat a little. Victoria spent the next 2 hours pacing her penthouse, looking out at the city skyline, trying to calm her nerves. She was a CEO, for goodness sake. She'd negotiated million-dollar deals with some of the toughest business people in the country. She'd fired executives, sued competitors, and stared down investors who wanted to take control of her company. But somehow, this conversation made her nervous. At exactly 9 o'clock, her doorman buzzed. "Mrs. Ashford, Robert is here to see you." "Send him up." She positioned herself behind her desk the same way she did when she needed to establish authority in a meeting. It was a power move, and she knew it. But she wanted answers, and she wanted Robert to understand this was serious. The knock on her office door was gentle. "Come in." Robert entered, and for the first time, Victoria saw him look uncertain. He was wearing his usual pressed shirt and dark slacks. his gray hair neatly combed, but there was something different in his eyes. Worry, maybe, or fear. Good, she thought. Then immediately felt guilty for thinking it. Please sit down, she said. Gesturing to the chair across from her desk, Robert sat, his hands folded in his lap, his posture straight but tense. He looked like a student called to the principal's office. Victoria let the silence stretch for a moment. It was another negotiation tactic. Let the other person speak first, let them fill the uncomfortable quiet. But Robert didn't speak. He just waited, watching her with those kind eyes that now seemed guarded. Finally, Victoria leaned forward, her hands clasped on the desk. Robert, I'm going to be direct with you because I think after 3 years, you deserve that much. I've noticed something unusual over the past 2 weeks, and I need you to be completely honest with me. He nodded slowly, but said nothing. I've heard you speaking 9 different languages. 9, Robert. French, Spanish, Mandarin, German, Russian, Arabic, Portuguese, Japanese, and Italian. And you speak all of them fluently, like someone who studied for years or lived in those countries. Victoria watched his face carefully. He looked down at his hands, and she saw his jaw tighten. I need to know who you really are, she continued, her voice harder now. I run a multi-million-dollar company. I have access to sensitive information. I meet with powerful people, and I've had a driver for 3 years who I apparently know nothing about. A driver who has skills that seem frankly suspicious. Robert's head snapped up. Suspicious? Yes, suspicious. Victoria stood up, crossing her arms. Why would someone who speaks 9 languages be working as a driver? What aren't you telling me? Are you gathering information? Are you working for someone? The words hung in the air between them. Victoria watched emotions flicker across Robert's face. Surprise, hurt, and something else. Shame, maybe, Mrs. Ashford, He stopped, cleared his throat. I can explain, but I promise you it's not what you think. Then what is it? Because from where I'm standing, this doesn't make sense. Robert looked down again, and Victoria noticed his hands were trembling slightly. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. May I tell you a story? Victoria hesitated, then sat back down. Go ahead. Robert took a deep breath, and when he looked up, his eyes were distant, as if he was seeing something far away. 5 years ago, I was a professor. I taught linguistics at Columbia University. I had been there for over 20 years. I loved my job. I loved teaching, loved research, loved languages. They were my whole life. Victoria felt her certainty waver. A professor? I was married to a wonderful woman named Catherine. We didn't have children, but we had each other, and we had our work. She was a librarian. We were happy. His voice caught slightly on the word happy, and Victoria noticed him swallow hard. Then Catherine got sick. Cancer. It started small, but it spread fast. We tried everything: surgery, chemotherapy, experimental treatments. I used our savings. I took out loans. I sold our house and moved into a smaller apartment so we could afford better doctors. Victoria felt her chest tighten. This wasn't the story she'd been expecting. She fought for 18 months. I took a leave of absence from the university to care for her. I was with her every single day, and I'd do it again without hesitation. But when she died, Robert paused, his voice thick with emotion. He took a moment to compose himself. When she died, I was left with over $300,000 in medical debt. The hospital bills, the treatments that insurance wouldn't cover, the medications. It was crushing. Victoria's suspicions were crumbling with every word. I tried to go back to teaching, but the university had filled my position during my leave. Budget cuts were happening everywhere in academia. I applied to dozens of schools. I had a PhD from Cambridge, over 20 years of teaching experience, published research. But I was 53 years old with a huge employment gap, and every rejection letter felt like another door closing. He looked directly at Victoria now, his eyes filled with a pain she recognized. She'd seen that look before in people who'd lost everything. I needed to work. I needed to survive. The debt collectors were calling every day. I was about to lose my apartment. So I took the first job I could get that paid decently, driving. A friend knew someone who needed a reliable driver. That's how I ended up working for your company. Victoria sat back in her chair, feeling her face flush with embarrassment and shame. She'd accused this man of being a spy when he was just someone trying to survive after tragedy. Robert, I'm sorry, I didn't. He held up a hand gently. Please let me finish. You asked about the languages. Victoria nodded, unable to speak. After Catherine died and I lost my teaching job, I felt like I'd lost my identity. I was 53 years old, working as a driver, drowning in debt and completely alone. I could have given up. Part of me wanted to. His voice grew stronger, more determined. But I decided that even if I couldn't be a professor anymore, I wouldn't let my mind die. Languages had always been my passion. Before Catherine got sick, I spoke 4 languages fluently, so I decided to keep learning. It gave me something to live for, something to work toward when everything else felt meaningless. Robert pulled out his phone and showed Victoria his screen. It was filled with language learning apps, digital flashcards, online courses. I wake up at 4 every morning and study for 2 hours before I start work. During my shifts, when I'm waiting for you or other clients, I watch foreign films, listen to podcasts in different languages, practice with language exchange partners online. When I'm done for the day, I study for another 2 hours before bed. Victoria stared at him, completely speechless. I spend my lunch breaks in different neighborhoods, Chinatown, Little Italy, Russian Brighton Beach. I talk to people. I practice. I make mistakes and learn from them. Every person I help with directions, every conversation I have, it's practice. It's learning. It's me refusing to let that part of myself die. He looked at Victoria with an intensity she'd never seen from him before. You asked who I really am. I'm a widower who lost everything. I'm a former professor who can't get back into academia. I'm a man with massive debt who drives for a living. But I'm also someone who refuses to stop growing, stop learning, stop being curious about the world. Robert's voice softened again. I never meant to hide anything from you, Mrs. Ashford. You never asked about my background, and I didn't think my past mattered for the job you hired me to do. I drive you safely to your appointments. I'm on time. I'm professional. That's what you needed. Victoria felt tears prickling at her eyes. She never cried, especially not in professional settings, but this moment felt different. How many languages do you speak now? She asked quietly. 9 fluently. I'm working on Korean. That'll be my 10th. And you do this all on your own? Just studying during your free time? Robert nodded. It's the only thing that makes me feel like myself again. Like I'm still the person I used to be, even if my circumstances have changed. Victoria stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. She thought about her own privileged life, about how she'd been born into wealth and had never really struggled. She thought about her initial suspicions, her accusations, and felt ashamed. She turned back to Robert, who was still sitting quietly, waiting for her response. Robert, I owe you an apology. A huge one. I jumped to conclusions without knowing anything about your story. I accused you of things without giving you a chance to explain. That was wrong of me, and I'm truly sorry. Robert stood up. Mrs. Ashford, you had every right to question. No, Victoria interrupted. I didn't. I had 3 years to have a real conversation with you, to see you as a person instead of just someone who drives me around. That failure is on me. They stood in silence for a moment, and something shifted in the air between them. The power dynamic that had always existed seemed less important now. Can I ask you something? Victoria said. Of course. Do you miss teaching? Robert's face changed, and for the first time Victoria saw real emotion break through his careful composure. His eyes became glassy and he looked away. Every single day, he whispered. Every single day. That answer would stay with Victoria for a long time. Long after Robert left her office, long after she'd returned to her usual routine, those 3 words kept echoing in her mind. Every single day, she'd called Robert to expose a secret, to uncover some hidden agenda. Instead, she'd discovered something completely different. A story of loss, resilience, and the human spirit's refusal to be broken. But the conversation wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. Because as Robert closed the door behind him, an idea started forming in Victoria's mind. A crazy, impulsive idea that went against everything she'd normally do in business. She looked at her computer screen, then at the financial reports scattered across her desk. She thought about her company's expansion into international markets, about the challenges they'd been facing, about the position they'd been trying to fill for 6 months. And she thought about the man who'd just walked out of her office. The man who woke up at 4 every morning to study languages because it made him feel alive again. Maybe, just maybe, she'd been looking at this situation all wrong. Maybe she hadn't been meant to expose Robert's secret. Maybe she'd been meant to discover his potential. Victoria couldn't focus on work for the rest of that Monday. She sat in her office pretending to review contracts, but her mind kept drifting back to Robert's story. Every single day, those words haunted her. By Tuesday morning, she'd made a decision. She needed to know more. Not because she was suspicious anymore, but because something about Robert's situation bothered her deeply. Here was a brilliant man, clearly talented, working a job that barely scratched the surface of his abilities. She called him that afternoon. "Robert, would you mind joining me for coffee tomorrow morning? Before we head to the office, there's something I'd like to discuss." There was a pause on the line. "Of course, Mrs. Ashford, what time?" 7:30. "There's a cafe near my building. Nothing formal, just a conversation." When they met the next morning, Victoria had already claimed a quiet corner table. Robert arrived exactly on time, looking uncertain but composed. She'd ordered him a coffee, black, no sugar, the way she'd noticed he took it during the rare moments she'd seen him drinking coffee while waiting for her. "Thank you for meeting me," Victoria said as he sat down. "I know this is unusual." "It's fine, Mrs. Ashford, though I'll admit I'm curious what this is about." Victoria wrapped her hands around her own cup, gathering her thoughts. "After our conversation Monday, I couldn't stop thinking. You mentioned you were a professor at Columbia, that you had a PhD from Cambridge. I hope you don't mind, but I looked you up." Robert's expression didn't change, but she saw him tense slightly. "I wasn't trying to invade your privacy," she continued quickly. "I just needed to verify what you told me. Not because I didn't believe you, but because, well, I'll get to that in a moment." She pulled out her tablet and turned it toward him. On the screen was an article from an academic journal, dated 7 years ago. The author photo showed Robert, younger and smiling, standing in front of a chalkboard filled with phonetic symbols. "This is you, isn't it? Dr. Robert Chen, published author, award-winning professor, keynote speaker at international linguistics conferences." Robert looked at the screen and something painful crossed his face. That was a long time ago. That person doesn't exist anymore. "But he does," Victoria insisted. "He's sitting right here. You're the same person, Robert. You've just been through hell." Robert looked up at her and she saw his eyes were glistening. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I need to understand something. I contacted Columbia. I spoke with the head of the linguistics department. Professor Williams? He said you were one of the most brilliant minds he'd ever worked with." Robert's hand shook slightly as he set down his coffee cup. "You called Columbia?" "Professor Williams said when budget cuts forced them to downsize. Letting you go during your leave was one of the biggest mistakes the department ever made. He said they tried to bring you back the following year, but they couldn't find you. You'd moved, changed your number. He thought maybe you'd left academia entirely." "I did leave," Robert said quietly. "I had to. Every time I walked past a university or saw students with their textbooks, it was like a knife in my chest. I couldn't keep applying for positions and getting rejected. After the 50th rejection letter, I stopped looking. I needed to survive, and I couldn't keep hoping for something that wasn't going to happen." Victoria leaned forward. "What if I told you that you gave up too soon?" Robert looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "Professor Williams gave me your complete employment history, your publications, everything. Robert, your CV is incredible. Before Catherine got sick, you were publishing research papers, mentoring graduate students, getting invited to speak at conferences around the world. You specialized in language acquisition and cross-cultural communication." "I know what I did," Robert said, a hint of pain in his voice. "I lived it. But that's over now." "It doesn't have to be." Robert shook his head. "Mrs. Ashford, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I'm 58 years old. I've been out of academia for 5 years. I have debt collectors still calling me every month. No university is going to hire someone in my position. I'm not talking about a university." Robert paused, studying her face. "Then what are you talking about?" Victoria took a breath. This was the moment. She'd spent all of yesterday evening thinking about this, running numbers, considering the implications. It was risky. It was unconventional. Her board would probably think she'd lost her mind. But sometimes the best decisions were the ones that seemed crazy at first. "My company is expanding internationally," she began. "We're opening offices in 6 new countries over the next 2 years. Japan, Brazil, Germany, Russia, the United Arab Emirates, and Italy. We've been trying to fill a position for 8 months now, Director of International Relations. We need someone who can help us navigate cultural differences, communicate with our international partners, understand the nuances of doing business in different countries. Robert was staring at her now, his coffee forgotten. We've interviewed dozens of candidates, Victoria continued. People with business degrees, people with international experience, people who speak 2 or maybe 3 languages. But they all lack something. They understand business, sure, but they don't really understand culture. They don't understand that language is more than just words. It's a window into how people think, how they see the world, what they value. She paused, letting her words sink in. You understand that, Robert? You've dedicated your life to studying how people communicate across cultures. You speak 9 languages. You have a PhD in linguistics. You've published research on cross-cultural communication. And more than that, you've spent the last 5 years proving that you're someone who never gives up, who keeps growing even when life knocks you down. Robert opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. Victoria could see the conflict on his face, hope fighting with disbelief. Mrs. Ashford, I drive cars for a living. I don't have business experience. I've never worked in real estate or corporate settings. You managed a university department. You negotiated budgets, supervised staff, dealt with administration. That's business, Robert, just in a different context. But Stop, Victoria said gently. I can see you're about to list all the reasons why this won't work. So let me be clear. I'm not offering you this out of pity. I'm not offering it because I feel guilty about our conversation on Monday. I'm offering it because I think you're exactly the person we need, and we've been looking for 8 months without finding anyone half as qualified as you. Robert sat back in his chair, looking stunned. You're serious, completely serious when you're offering me a job. A real job? In your company? Yes, doing what exactly? Victoria smiled. Let me paint you a picture. Our Tokyo office opens in 6 months. Right now we're struggling because none of our executives speak Japanese, and we're relying on translators who don't understand the real estate business. We're making cultural mistakes left and right. Last month we accidentally insulted a potential partner because we didn't understand the proper way to exchange business cards in Japan. It cost us a $20 million deal. Robert winced. The Meishi. Business card exchange is a ritual there. You're supposed to receive it with both hands, study it respectfully, never put it in your back pocket. Exactly, Victoria said. That's exactly the kind of knowledge we need. Or take our Brazil office. We're negotiating with local contractors, but we keep running into communication problems that go beyond language. They think we're rude and pushy. We think they're inefficient and unreliable. It's a cultural disconnect that no translator can fix. Brazilians tend to value personal relationships over contracts, Robert said thoughtfully. They want to know you as a person first, build trust. Americans often want to get straight to business, which can seem cold. Yes, that's what we need. Someone who can bridge those gaps, who can help our executives understand not just what to say, but how to say it, when to say it, what it means in that cultural context. Robert was leaning forward now, engaged despite himself. What about the Middle East office? Dubai, we're drowning there. We don't understand the business culture, the negotiation style, the importance of hospitality and relationships. We have someone who speaks basic Arabic, but it's not enough. It's never just about the language, Robert said quietly. It's about understanding worldview, values, social norms. In Arab business culture, building trust is everything. Contracts are important, but relationships come first. And there are so many unspoken rules about hierarchy, respect, privacy. Victoria felt excitement building in her chest. This was the Robert that Professor Williams had described. Passionate, knowledgeable, engaged. This was the professor, not just the driver. So what do you say? She asked. Robert looked down at his hands. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Why would you take a chance on me? You could hire someone younger, someone without my baggage. Because the younger candidates we've interviewed don't have your depth of knowledge. They speak languages, sure, but they don't understand them the way you do. They see language as a tool. You see it as a gateway to human understanding. That's the difference between a translator and what we need. I have debt, Robert said. A lot of debt. I'm still paying off Catherine's medical bills. The salary would help with that. Significantly. He looked up at her, and she saw tears in his eyes. I've been driving cars for 5 years. I've barely spoken to anyone about linguistics or culture or anything I used to care about. What if I'm not good enough anymore? What if I've forgotten too much? Victoria reached across the table and touched his hand gently. Robert, you wake up at 4 every morning to study languages. You've added 5 new languages to your repertoire in 5 years. You help strangers in their native languages just because you can. You haven't forgotten anything. If anything, you've grown. Robert pulled out his phone with shaking hands. Can I show you something? Of course. He scrolled through his photos and turned the phone toward her. The image showed a younger Robert in academic robes standing at a podium with a certificate in his hands. Behind him was a banner reading Excellence in Teaching Award. This was 8 years ago, he said. I won this award for creating a program that helped international students adapt to American academic culture. I was so proud that day. Catherine was in the audience cheering louder than anyone. His voice cracked slightly. After she died, I put all my awards, my certificates, my publications in storage. I couldn't look at them. They reminded me of everything I'd lost. He swiped to another photo. This one showed a cluttered storage unit, boxes stacked high, a dusty desk barely visible in the back. That's all sitting in a storage unit in Queens. My whole life, my whole career, in boxes collecting dust. I pay $90 a month to store things I can't bear to look at but can't throw away. Victoria felt her throat tighten. Robert, the night you texted me to come to your office, I thought you were going to fire me. I thought somehow I'd messed up, done something wrong. I was terrified because this job, this simple job driving people around, it's all I have. It pays my bills. It keeps me afloat. He looked at her directly now. But part of me, a small part I've been trying to ignore for 5 years, was almost relieved. Because if I got fired, maybe I'd finally have an excuse to give up, to stop pretending I'm okay, to stop studying languages every morning, because what's the point? Robert, and then Monday happened. You confronted me and I had to tell you everything. I had to admit out loud that I'm a failure. That I lost everything. That I'm a PhD from Cambridge who drives a car for a living. You're not a failure, Victoria said firmly. Then why does it feel like I am? They sat in silence for a moment. The cafe buzzed with morning conversations around them, but their corner felt separate, private. Finally, Victoria spoke. Because you're judging yourself by where you are, not by how far you've traveled to get here. You suffered an unimaginable loss. You went through financial devastation. You had to completely rebuild your life from scratch. And instead of giving up, instead of letting those circumstances destroy you, you kept learning. You kept growing. You kept being curious about the world. She leaned forward. That's not failure, Robert. That's heroism. Robert wiped his eyes quickly. I don't feel like a hero. Heroes never do. Victoria pulled out a folder she'd been keeping in her bag. This is a formal job offer. Director of International Relations. The salary is listed there. It's competitive for the position, 6 figures. Full benefits, including health insurance that would cover pre-existing conditions. Retirement plan. 3 weeks paid vacation. Robert stared at the folder like it might bite him. I don't need an answer today, Victoria said. Take the week. Think about it. Talk to Professor Williams if you want. I gave him your new number. I hope that's okay. Look over the offer. Consider whether this is something you want. You really think I can do this? I know you can. Robert picked up the folder with trembling hands. He opened it and scanned the first page. His eyes widened when he saw the salary figure. This is, Mrs. Ashford, this is more than I made as a full professor. You'd be doing more than teaching. You'd be helping build an international company, shaping how we interact with different cultures, potentially training other staff members. And frankly, we've been losing money hand over fist on these international expansions because we don't have someone who knows what they're doing. If you can help us avoid just one major cultural mistake, you'll have paid for your salary several times over. Robert looked at her, really looked at her, and Victoria saw something she hadn't seen before in his eyes. Not just hope, but possibility. The possibility of a future that looked different than his present. I need to ask you something, he said. Why are you doing this? Really? Victoria considered the question. Because Monday morning I was looking at you as a problem to solve, a mystery to uncover. But by Monday afternoon I realized you weren't a mystery. You were a mirror. A mirror? My father built our company from nothing. He came to this country with almost no money and worked 3 jobs while going to night school. When I was growing up, he used to tell me that talent exists everywhere, but opportunity doesn't. He said the difference between success and failure often isn't ability, it's just who gets a chance. Victoria smiled softly. I inherited my father's company. I was born with opportunities most people never get. But you earned everything. You built your career through hard work and dedication, and when life destroyed everything you'd built, you kept going. You kept learning. You kept growing. She looked Robert in the eyes. My father would have loved your story. He would have hired you in a heartbeat, so I guess I'm doing this because it's what he would have done, and because somewhere out there might be a brilliant kid with no opportunities, and maybe if our company is built by people who understand what it's like to struggle, we'll remember to give that kid a chance someday. Robert's hands were shaking as he closed the folder. Can I really think about this for a week? Take as long as you need. What if I say no? Then you say no and you continue being my driver and we never speak of this again. Your job is safe either way. I'm not offering this because I want to get rid of you as a driver. I'm offering it because I genuinely think you're the right person for this position. Robert stood up slowly, clutching the folder like it was made of gold. Mrs. Ashford, Victoria, thank you. Even if I don't take it, even if this doesn't work out, thank you for seeing me as more than just your driver. Victoria stood too and extended her hand. Thank you for trusting me with your story. They shook hands, and in that moment something fundamental had changed between them. They weren't employer and employee anymore, at least not in the same way. They were two people who'd seen each other's humanity. As Robert walked out of the cafe, Victoria sat back down and watched him through the window. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just looking at the folder in his hands, his face a mixture of emotions she couldn't quite read from this distance. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her assistant. Board meeting in 30 minutes. They're going to ask about the international relations position again. Victoria smiled to herself. Let them ask. She had a feeling she might have found her candidate. Now she just had to convince Robert to take the chance. And more importantly, she had to convince him that he deserved it. Robert sat in his small studio apartment that night, the job offer spread across his kitchen table. The paper seemed to glow under the cheap lamp, like it was something from another world that had accidentally landed in his life. He'd read it 17 times already. Each time he found himself stopping at the same line, starting salary $165,000 annually. That was more money than he'd made even at the peak of his academic career. That was enough to pay off his remaining debt within a few years. That was enough to move out of this cramped studio with the leaking faucet and the neighbors who fought at 2 a.m. But it wasn't about the money. Not really. Robert walked to his closet and pulled down a box from the top shelf. Inside were things he hadn't looked at in years. His Cambridge diploma, photos from conferences, published articles with his name in the byline, student thank you cards. There was a picture of Catherine, beaming at him from the audience during a keynote speech he'd given in London. He picked it up carefully as if it might crumble in his hands. What should I do? He whispered to the photo. Catherine smiled back at him, frozen in that moment of pride and joy. She'd always believed in him more than he believed in himself. His phone rang. He almost didn't answer when he saw it was an unknown number, but something made him pick up. Robert, this is Professor Williams from Columbia. Robert's hand tightened on the phone. Professor Williams, I wasn't expecting to hear from you. Victoria Ashford called me yesterday. She wanted references for you. I told her you were the best colleague I ever had the privilege of working with. Robert felt his eyes burning. That's very kind of you to say. It's not kindness, it's the truth. There was a pause. Robert, I want you to know something. When we had to let you go during those budget cuts, I fought against it. I fought hard. But you were on leave. And the administration decided that anyone currently on leave was expendable. It was one of the most disgraceful decisions I've witnessed in my 30 years at Columbia. I didn't know you fought for me. I tried to bring you back the following year. We found funding, but by then you'd disappeared. We couldn't find you. I thought maybe you'd gone to another university. But when I checked with colleagues, no one had seen you. It was like you'd vanished from academia entirely. Robert sat down heavily on his worn couch. I gave up, Professor. After 50 rejection letters, I just gave up. And now? Now I'm being offered a second chance at something, and I'm terrified. Professor Williams chuckled softly. You know what I remember most about you? The way you used to talk about language like it was magic. You'd tell students that every language they learned gave them a new way of seeing the world. You made even the most skeptical business major excited about linguistics. That feels like a lifetime ago. It was 5 years ago, Robert. You're the same person. You've just been through hell. What if I've lost it? What if I can't do it anymore? Have you stopped learning languages? No, but have you stopped being curious about how people communicate across cultures? No? Then you haven't lost anything. You've actually gained something. You've gained perspective that most academics never have. You've experienced real loss, real struggle. That makes you more qualified, not less. After the call ended, Robert sat in the dark, thinking. Around midnight, he made a decision. He couldn't decide this alone. He needed to talk to someone who knew him, really knew him. The next morning, he drove to Queens to visit his storage unit. He hadn't been there in over a year. He just paid the monthly fee automatically and tried not to think about it. The unit smelled like dust and old paper. His entire professional life was packed into this 10 by 10 concrete box. He found what he was looking for in the third box he opened, a journal Catherine had given him for his 50th birthday. He'd filled dozens of pages before she got sick, then stopped writing entirely. Now he opened it and read entries from another life. Catherine says I work too hard, but how can I not when I love what I do? Today, a student who barely spoke at the start of semester gave an entire presentation in French. The pride on her face was everything. Accepted for keynote at the International Linguistics Conference in Berlin. Catherine wants to make it a vacation, a week in Germany. She's already planning which museums to visit. Published in the Journal of Cross-Cultural Communication, Catherine insisted on champagne even though it's just another article. She says every achievement deserves celebration. Robert's vision blurred as he read. Catherine's voice echoed in his memory. You don't just teach languages, sweetheart. You teach people how to connect with other humans. That's sacred work. He flipped to a blank page near the end of the journal and pulled out a pen. His hand shook as he wrote, Catherine, I'm scared. Someone is offering me a chance to be myself again, and I don't know if I remember how. What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough anymore? What if... He stopped writing and stared at the words. Then he remembered something Catherine used to say when he was stressed about a big presentation or worried about a difficult class. The only real failure is not trying. Everything else is just learning. Robert closed the journal and looked around the storage unit at all these boxes, these pieces of his former life gathering dust. Maybe it was time to stop looking backward. Maybe it was time to take these things out of storage, literally and figuratively. Over the next few days, Robert found himself watching Victoria differently. Not as his employer, but as a leader. He noticed how she treated everyone, from the parking attendant to her executive team, with the same respect. He saw how she made decisions, how she listened, how she held people accountable but also supported them. One afternoon, they were stuck in traffic when Victoria got a call from one of her international partners. Robert could hear the frustration in her voice as she tried to explain something about a contract dispute. The conversation wasn't going well. When she hung up, she sighed heavily. That was our contact in Germany. There's been a miscommunication about payment terms, and now they think we're trying to cheat them. I can't figure out how to explain our position without making it worse. Robert spoke without thinking. In German business culture, directness is valued, but so is thoroughness. They likely feel you're being vague, which suggests dishonesty to them. You need to be extremely specific about every detail, even if it feels excessive. Show them exact numbers, exact dates, exact terms. Leave no room for interpretation. Victoria turned to look at him. That's exactly the kind of insight we've been missing. See, Robert? This is what we need. That night, Robert called Professor Williams again. Tell me honestly, am I crazy to consider this? Crazy not to consider it, more like. Robert, when was the last time you felt excited about work? Robert thought about it. The morning after Victoria offered me the job. I woke up at 4 like always, but instead of just doing my usual language study, I started researching business customs in Japan because I couldn't stop thinking about their Tokyo expansion. There's your answer. But what if... Stop. I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to answer honestly. If you don't take this job, where will you be in 5 years? Robert was quiet for a long moment. Still driving. Still studying languages alone in my apartment. Still visiting Catherine's grave every Sunday and wondering what might have been. And if you do take it, I don't know. That's what scares me. That's what makes it worth doing. Robert, you've been surviving for 5 years. Maybe it's time to start living again. After that conversation, Robert spent an entire day in his apartment making lists. Pros and cons, fears and hopes. Reasons to say yes and reasons to say no. The no list was longer. He had no business experience. He'd been out of professional settings for years. He might embarrass himself. He might fail and lose this second chance at having a meaningful career, but the yes list, though shorter, carried more weight. He'd finally be using his skills again. He'd be making a real difference. He'd be able to pay off his debt and rebuild his life. He'd wake up with purpose instead of just routine. And underneath all the practical reasons, there was something else. He'd be honoring Catherine's memory. She'd always told him his work mattered, that helping people understand each other across cultures was important. If he took this job, he'd be doing exactly that. On Friday morning, exactly a week after Victoria had given him the offer, Robert asked if they could meet again at the same cafe. Victoria was already there when he arrived, 2 coffees on the table. She looked nervous, which surprised him. He'd never seen her nervous before. "I've made a decision," Robert said as he sat down. Victoria nodded but didn't speak, just waited. "I've spent this whole week being terrified, listing all the reasons why I'm not qualified, why this won't work, why I should just stay where I am because at least it's safe." He saw Victoria's face fall slightly. "But then I realized something. I've been playing it safe for 5 years. I've been hiding in a job that doesn't challenge me, in an apartment that's barely living, in a routine that's more about existing than thriving. And you know what? Safe hasn't made me happy. It's just made me smaller." Robert pulled the signed offer letter from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. "I'm going to mess up. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm probably going to have moments where I wonder what the hell I was thinking accepting this job. But I'd rather fail trying to be myself than succeed at pretending I'm someone I'm not." Victoria picked up the letter, and Robert saw her hands were shaking. When she looked up, there were tears in her eyes. "You have no idea how happy this makes me," she said. "I'm scared out of my mind." "Good. That means it matters." Victoria reached across the table and shook his hand firmly. "Welcome to the team, Dr. Chen, or should I say Director Chen?" "Just Robert is fine. Not anymore. You've earned your title back." Over the next few days, the reality of what he'd done started to sink in. He gave his 2 weeks' notice to the driving company. He began moving his belongings out of storage. He bought his first new suit in 6 years. He also started preparing for his new role with the same intensity he'd brought to his language studies. He researched Victoria's company, studied their international expansion plans, read everything he could about cross-cultural business communication. One evening, he received an email from Victoria with the subject line, "Your first project." He opened it with his heart pounding. Inside was a detailed brief about their upcoming negotiations in Tokyo. They were scheduled to meet with 3 different potential partners, and the meetings weren't going well. Victoria had written, "I need your expertise. Can you prepare a cultural guide for our team? What should we know? What are we doing wrong? How can we fix this before we lose these partnerships?" Robert stared at the email for a long moment. Then he smiled, a real smile, the kind he hadn't felt in years, and started typing. He worked through the night, creating a comprehensive guide covering everything from proper business card etiquette to the importance of nemawashi, laying groundwork for decisions in informal settings before formal meetings. He included tips on communication styles, the role of silence in Japanese business culture, gift-giving protocols, and how to read subtle cues that Americans often missed. He sent the document to Victoria at 5 in the morning, then collapsed into bed exhausted but energized in a way he hadn't